Good morning, everybody. It's
Morning.
March 2nd, 2024, 10 a.m. Pacific time, or just after 10 a.m. Pacific time. And the topic for today's presentation is observing the signs of our time. We've been doing a weekly presentation every Saturday since early December. Thank you to Bible Explorations TV for hosting the presentations. They can be seen on the YouTube channel. They can be seen live on Roku. They can be seen live on satellite. You can go back and rewatch a presentation at the BibleExplorations.com YouTube channel. So again, if you've missed anything in the series, you can go back and rewatch anything to be able to catch up to speed. We going to give you a little bit of a background here first, and then get into the presentation. But we compared the calling of the seventh generation in the book of Revelation to the calling of Ezekiel. And we noticed in the similarity is that Ezekiel was to take a role that was open before him, and he was supposed to spread it before him, and he was supposed to eat this roll or fully digest it before he went to go speak on behalf of God to the house of Israel. This is the prophet Ezekiel. And when he did eat it, it was like honey in his mouth. It was, it was once he absorbed it, once he was able to speak it, it was sweet as honey to him. We know it's the same sort of thing, calling to the seventh generation in the book of Revelation. It was a little book was presented, which was open, and he was supposed to take it up and digest this. And in his mouth, it was sweet as honey. And for what purpose? It was to go and prophecy again one more time before people, nations, tongues, and kings. So this is really the last call in the book of Revelation, God's last call before the return of Christ. And the very next chapter begins with an instruction for this generation and says to rise and measure the temple of God, the altar, and them that worship there. It's Revelation 1:1. So you're supposed to measure, observe, assess everything about the tabernacle and this pattern. And this pattern was given during the giving of the covenant through Moses. And he was given this pattern to record and told not to deviate from it at all. In fact, we looked a little bit about what the apostles said about this pattern, and they said that the place where they serve, which is this tabernacle, is a copy and a shadow of what is in heaven. So it foreshadows heaven. These observations that we're looking at are a shadow of things to come, but the body that casts it belongs to Christ. So they're all foreshadowing events of Christ, how God's redemption of man through Christ. And this explains in Hebrews 8:5, this is why Moses was warned when he was about to build a tabernacle. See to it that you make it everything according to the pattern shown in the mountain. So he wasn't supposed to deviate at all from this pattern. And now we're supposed to go back after thousands of years and observe it again. Because, of course, there's been all kinds of corruption in our religious observance and in the world's observance. So we looked at first the very first thing that we were given, which was the mercy seat and the Ark of the Covenant. And we were given dimensions, and we were given really it gives us a whole picture of what it's the most holy object in the most holy place, reserved for the most holy day of the year, which is the Day of Atonement, when the most holy anointed would sprinkle the blood on that mercy seat for the atonement of sin for the whole congregation. So, we started looking at that. We looked at the dimensions 2x5 by 1x5. We're talking about the mercy seat, which is on top here, the mercy seat sitting on top of the ark. So it's 1.5 by 2.5. We started to make observations about time, and we said that our generation has an advantage over every generation before us, and that our observation of time has is come full circle. We can observe, days, minutes, seconds, in a much more, for example, back in the time of Jesus, they didn't have seconds or, even minutes or whatever, but we can observe time in a much more precise way now, both historic time and time itself. So one observation we make, for example, is that right at the year of the flood of Noah was 1656 years, but right at 16.56 hours, it's 284.4 degrees on a 24-hour clock. And we notice that this 16.56 and 2484 were the times that show up in our pattern. And we also notice that this is 69% of the rotation, and that things seem to happen at that 6.9, the tick between 6.9 and 7. And we sort of observed that, why? Well, we observed the Sabbath day. We observed, sort of piece things together, throughout our observations. We built a very full timeline, and we looked at all, things. We'll look just kind of at the basics right now, but so we see this top 1656 year period from Adam to the Ark of Noah, 2484 year period from the Ark of Noah to the baptism of Jesus. We notice that this time is 1.5 times time to the ark. So 1656 times 1.5 is 2484. And we notice the total timeline from Adam to the baptism is 4,140 years, which is 1656 times 2.5. So we have this, 1.5, 2.5 that's matched in this mercy seat to the person that was going to fulfill that atonement. And we notice that everything in the first part, the second timeline is exactly 1.5 of the first. So in other words, Enoch was the seventh from Adam, 621 years passed before Enoch. Moses was exactly 1.5 that time, 931.5 years is 621 times 1.5. Also, the years between Enoch and the ark match the years between Moses and the baptism of Jesus, being 1035 times 1.5 is 155.25 years. And then as you got a little bit more precise, we just start to look at Elijah and him being 621 years after Moses, and then this timeline from Elijah to Jesus being the same 931.5. So all of these things kind of filled in. And as we started to look at that they all come from these dimensions of 1.5 and 2.5 when you compare them to a literal day. So we took just the genealogy that we can fully prove, Adam to the Ark of Noah. That we went through Genesis and we saw, added up to 1656 years. So we took it just as literal time, 1656 minutes. So remember the first dimension is 1.5. So 1656 times 0.15 was 248.4 hours, which is 4.14, or 248.4 minutes, which is 4.14 hours and 62.1 degrees. So we have this 414, 621. But then we'd say, well, what's 1.5 times 1.5? And, that'd be 0.2.5. And we get the numbers again, 621, 931. What about the 2.5 length? Well, 0.25 of 1656 is 414 minutes, 6.9 hours, and 103.5 degrees. So again, you can see these numbers all fill in here. What about 3.75, which would be 1.5 times 2.5? Again, that's 621 minutes. That's 10.35 hours. That's 1.55.2 degrees. So you have this unmistakable, and then what's this 5.625? Well, that's taking all the dimensions because we saw that the arc height was 1.5. So we have 1.5 times 2.5 times another 1.5 is 5.625. And again, we get the same numbers in here. So, it was just observed up until this time, really from Adam to Jesus, and we really have been observing this mercy seat event, this Day of Atonement event. And we were just about to start on looking at, we noticed that this mercy seat has two features on it. One is the area where the atoning blood, is to be sprinkled. But also on the outside of this, there is a crown. And the crown is supposed to was given on purpose. And this crown talks more at the very height of the ark, the height of this 1.5, about the return as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So we're just starting to talk about, okay, because this pattern continues after the baptism of Jesus. It continues precisely in the same way right up until our time. And in our time, there's no more dimensions to add. In our time, the tabernacle is completely built. So we look at the ark, and this is what I want to point out that so talking about the ark, it said, and thou shalt overlay with pure gold, and shall make upon it a crown of gold all about. So this crown we're talking about. And the dimensions are given 2.5 shall be the length, a cubit and a half the breadth, and another 1.5 the height. So those are those numbers I was just talking about. And this mercy seat uh, is above it and to rest upon it. So this mercy seat, notice, is a covering. It doesn't have any height to it other than the angels and stuff like that. But those heights aren't given just for this piece of furniture. So we're now looking, we're about to look forward from the time of the baptism of Jesus until our own time. And part of our observations was as we started to look forward, we talked about an unusual event, which was during the flood of Noah, and how the ark came to rest on the 17th day of the seventh month on the mountains of Ararat. But also we noticed in the pattern given to Moses that same seventh month was to become the first month. So this month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It should be the first month of the year. So the seventh became the first. The 197th day became the 17th day of the first month. And it's important more later on than it is right at this moment, but it's important to make that observation that the seventh month became the first. I want to talk to you about something that um, today is going to be the last day in our series for a little while, for a few weeks, and for a couple of reasons. But it's really important to me to get the second part of this right, the part from the baptism of Jesus till our time. And I want to document this stuff into like a book form with the charts and different things so that it's easy for people to see and to follow along. I don't want to lose anybody along the way. And so I'm going to do that before I really get into the time from Jesus till our own time. But I want to give you a little bit of an overview today, and I want to share this one thing with you, that the tabernacle pattern is, just like as I showed you the first part of it, up from Adam to Jesus, every brick is filled in, and it's very consistent. The same thing happens after Jesus, till now in world history and different events. And 1980, the tabernacle pattern forecasts an event to happen, and it forecasts an end times event. So first of all, I'm going to talk to you about what happened in 1980, and then we're going to go back and just going to tell you the significance of it. So remember, I said that our generation has had a chance to observe time in a way that no other generation before us has. And that gives us understanding that other generations haven't had. And it's a beautiful thing. So, but this Mount St. Helens erupted on May 18th, 1980, and it remains the deadliest and most economically destructive volcanic event in U.S. history. You have things like Yellowstone and things like that, but these all erupted before the U.S. was a country. Mount St. Helens is the one event that happened in U.S. history, the most catastrophic event. But it's an event that was witnessed before and after and documented in a way that no other volcano has been, and nowhere else in the world since then has there been this type of documentation. And it's very important. This was given for us to observe. So 57 people were killed, 200 homes, 47 bridges, 15 miles of railways, 185 miles of highway were destroyed. A massive debris avalanche triggered by a magnitude 5.1 earthquake caused a lateral eruption that reduced the elevation of the mountain summit by about 1,000 feet, from 967 feet to 800, over 1,000 feet, 836 feet, leaving a 1 mile wide horseshoe shaped crater. The eruption of Mount St. Helens triggered multiple earth shaping forces. And I say earth shaping forces because here's an after picture. The original blast of steam was followed by landslides, volcanic ash, flowing on the ground, mud flows, steam, water, waves in Spirit Lake, and falling volcanic ash. Together, these produce complex sediment layers up to 600 feet thick. The resulting deposits contain sequences of multiple layers, including many fine volcanic ash beds ranging in thickness from a tiny fraction of an inch to as thick as 3 feet. Each bed was laid in just a few seconds to several minutes, resulting in a 1/40th scale of a mini Grand Canyon. And the primary researcher on this from the beginning until today is a gentleman named Dr. Steve Austin, a doctor in geology, brilliant guy. And if you want to just watch anything from Steve Austin, and you go Mount St. Helens, or he deserves all the credit because he brought a radical way of thinking about time, about geological time, that had been ignored, and been like the whole idea of geological time and the way they do the numbers of is all that what happens today has happened in the past. So when you just see a quarter inch of sediment a year adding, then that's why you get these billions of years from this layers of sediment. But the truth is, yeah, what happens today is a picture of what happened in the past. So when you see a catastrophic event today that can lay a 600-foot layered wall in a matter of 3 days, that's very significant of what happened in the past. You see this little creek running at the very bottom of this canyon. Now, the Grand Canyon story is that there's a little river at the bottom of it that somehow carved out the whole canyon. Came in, wider times, or, but that little creek, did all the carving. Whereas it's obvious in this Mount St. Helens model is that a big a flood of debris moving at record speed carved it all out, and the little creek came afterwards, not beforehand. So anyway, like I said, I encourage you to look at Dr. Steve Austin if you wanted more information about it. What's important. So during the initial blast, more than 2/3 of a cubic mile of rock material slid down the side of a volcano, and it blocked the drainage from Spirit Lake into Toutle River. It's the largest debris avalanche observed in human history. Now, larger debris have happened, but this was observed. This was measured. This was photographed. This was before, after, and it's the largest debris avalanche in human history. So 2 years later, March 19th, 1982, so there's this debris formed a big dam, and it blocked the river and blocked the drainage into Spirit Lake. 2 years later, March 19th, 1982, hot volcanic ash from another eruption in Mount St. Helens melted a thick snowpack in the center in a crater, and it created a destructive sheet-like flood of water and mud, which became a mud flow. Reaching the earlier deposits blocking Spirit Lake, the flow cut channels through the debris at 40 miles per hour. In other words, you have this big, blockage, and this thing came and cut like a saw blade at 40 miles an hour, cut a hole right through it. And individual canyons appeared in a single day. On either side of the canyons were elevated plateaus resembling the north and south rims of the Grand Canyon. it came back again. Another researcher came back and cut 125, 120 foot groove right into the hard rock, cut it right out of the hard rock and made another canyon. 17 successive flows formed a sixth dome in the 6 year between 1980 and 1986. These flows erupted more than 2.6 billion cubic feet of lava to form the sixth dome, which towered 1,150 feet above the crater floor. In June 1992, a large sample was collected from the surface of one of the last lava flows. So that was done by Steve Austin. Samples were sent to a radioscopic um, laboratory in 1996 to be dated using the potassium argon method. So the same method they use to date Grand Canyon and all these other things around the world is geologic column. This method measured the amount of argon produced from the radioactive decay of potassium in the lava rock, presumably after it had erupted and cooled. The rock was a mere 10 years old. Remember, this is 1996 that the thing was set for testing, and it was dated at 350,000 years old. And the minerals within it were dated 2.4 million years old. So that's using the same type of data testing that they use for this whole geologic column and everything, beforehand. So, it's since been applied all around the world, taken to different locations. Like Steve Austin's visited all kinds of areas. He spent over a year camped out in the Grand Canyon. He's a discoverer actually of a 12-foot column that goes for miles and miles and miles and miles, about one 12-foot long or 12-foot high um, strip of rock that has these nautiloids in it, which are like a squid that's inside of a hard shell. They're not existing anymore. And in that one layer, there's literally found billions of them. Like there's one every meter type thing. And so when you're thinking about the idea of evolution and it's supposed to be 1 centimeter a year type thing or whatever, and that these things evolved and this geographic thing captured the evolution. Did these billion nautiloids in this 12-foot section all evolve at one time, all in the Grand Canyon? You know, he what I'm saying is that you go back to Ellen White, and she was one of the earliest people talking about flood geology, and at that time, pretty much laughed away at. And but in the 1950s, then two people that took up her work actually, wrote the first book on that, and then ever since then, you've had young creationists and et cetera, people looking at the world differently. What I'm saying is that this event happened in our generation. Now, that doesn't mean that I showed you before when we did a thing about the flood, and we did compared it to the theory of evolution. And I showed you about sophism and rhetoric and why the theory will always exist and people will always argue it no matter what. They'll keep on, changing the goalposts, do whatever. But for the rational person that's actually seeking the truth, this event gave evidence can be observed around the world of how geological formations happen and how they can happen rapidly and what the result would be if you saw one, what you'd expect to see. And what do we see? We see billions of fossils all around the world. We see formations like this all around the world. 95% of the fossil record is marine, bottom dwelling marine life, like shells and mollusks and fibrillate, like things that dwell at the bottom of the sea. That's 95% of all the fossils out there. So and they're found in limestone, and limestone is full of sea, like marine calcium and small crushed shells and stuff. It's the thing that gives the cementing power to it. In fact, limestone is the main ingredient in cement. but those are formed in marine conditions, like seawater conditions. So how did all this limestone from the sea end up all over the earth, all around the earth in such abundance? And it's full of these, these fossils that are all bottom dwelling sea life. How did that end up on the earth with no flood, with no, it's you really got to fight hard, and this is just one example. And of course, I can't do it justice in this little bit here, but I'm saying to you and I, and to me, when I was looking for the truth or whatever, that this event in 1980 showed us something about the past. It's like, when we had no proof other than, people using common sense that these fossils were from the flood or whatever. But this showed us how strata forms, how it and even that showed us this Rader's isotopics testing, the dating and stuff like that. You'd find the same numbers here. So I'm not going to belabor it too much more, but um, it was given for us to observe. It also showed us things like on coal and other features. So the volcanic blast of 1980, traveling at an initial speed of over 650 miles an hour, destroyed the forest in the surrounding 150 square miles within 6 minutes. Douglas firs as tall as 200 feet were instantly stripped of their branches and snapped like toothpicks. Within 5 years, an enormous log mat floating on Spirit Lake lost its bark and its branches, rubbed off by the abrasive action of the wind and waves. Anything that hadn't been stripped off before, this big floating mass, was stripped of its bark and its branches. Also, the trees were many of the trees were floating upright because the heavier part, the bottom of the trees, which were the roots and things that normally are, were more porous, more accepted more water. They were heavier, and so they ended up sinking straight down into the seabed. Within 5 years, scuba investigators of the lake bottom subsequently revealed that sheets of bark intermingled with volcanic sediments had formed a layer of peat more than 3 feet thick. It's only 5 years later, 3 foot thick layer of peat. Previously, geologists claimed that coal beds formed by the very slow accumulation of organic materials in vast swamps. They estimated 1,000 years is required for each inch of coal. So here in 5 years, you got 3 feet of peat. So they're saying 1,000 years to make an inch, and they're saying it's in a calm swamp where those existing plants eventually fell to the bottom and they made peat, as opposed to that there, bark and things that are all ripped up from the same flood and deposited there very quickly at the bottom. That they sank, and that the trees, and you see when you look at strata today, there's all kinds of areas where there's trees. It looks like a forest because you see these stripped bark trees, and they're not all straight. They're kind of at angles or whatever, and they're in the strata where coal is and stuff like that. And they say that's a forest, an ancient forest. Well, it's not a forest. It's where the logs and bark and stuff settled into the sediment, just like they were here, a 3 foot thick that were that buried themselves into the sediments at the bottom of this lake. So again, we're observing time, and we start looking at coal and other features and strata, and we see the exact same picture, and we're given this picture to observe. Doesn't mean everyone's going to believe it, but it's exactly the same thing, exactly what you expect, exactly what you see in the things like the Grand Canyon. Let me go back here for a second. So again, this is one observation we were given, and we were given this generation was given that if you in 1979 you didn't have this observation. 1980 onwards you have this observation, and it's still going on. 40 years of research and things are still going on observations are being made from this. But like I said, it's a nail in the coffin for for the fossil story for evolution. So don't expect it to be accepted. But like I said, if you're searching for the truth, here's what was shown to us in our generation. And now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about um, how the tabernacle pattern actually predicts this. So 6,000 years, we have a day is 1,000 years, 1,000 days. So the 6,000 year mark came in the year 1800 if you use prophetic years, and 1888 if you use literal observed years. What I mean by that, well, a prophetic year has 360 days. A literally observed year is 365.2 days. So over 6,000 years, the difference is about 88 years. So if you said, well, when did we hit the 6,000 years? Well, either 1800 if you're using prophetic years, or 1888, somewhere between 1886 and 1888. So when that happened, a whole series of world events happened, began to happen. That is the beginning of a series. When the clock strikes, things happen afterwards. I'll give you an example of this first. Is that um, well, let's just keep going here. So there's all the Euro wars and revolutions, the French Revolution, all this struggles over Europe. The things talked about in the Book of Revelation, which was written in the first century AD. So it's talking about things in 1800, like the papal captivity. He goes into captivity, or leads into captivity, go into captivity. Humanism, Darwin's book came out. All these, things happen at the same time. Beneficial things happen too. The formation of the church, etc. Um, when you look at the patriarchs, there's a 360-year period from when Abraham is born to when Joseph dies. It's actually 361 years, but there's a 360-year period between Abraham and Joseph. Isaac was 180 years. That's how long he lived. Abraham was 100 before Isaac was born, so it's 280 years. Started this 360-year cycle. When Isaac died at 180 years old, that was 0.777 of the 360 years. A series of events happened after Isaac died. The very next year, Joseph became second in command in Egypt. Jacob, that time, was 120 years old. He was 100 when Jacob was 120 when Isaac died, 121 when Joseph, became in charge of Egypt. Jacob was 130 when he was on at the time of he came in a year of famine. He was 147 when he died. So all these things are adding up to this period of time. But from 1800 to plus 180 years is exactly 1980 when the Mount St. Helens happened, and a series of things started to happen then as well. So, for example, the deadly wound that's talked about in Revelation was healed. The USA and Vatican established diplomatic relations January 10th, 1984. This, the 10 toes that wouldn't cleave together. 1986 was a single European act. The treaty 1992, another treaty in 1997, another treaty in 2001, another treaty in 2007. All of these unifying everything, in the European Union. But again, as also 2020, Britain exits out, and that's is a very significant year as well. But what I'm saying is that when you have an event, let me give you an example at the bottom here. So the covenant with Abraham was when he was 75 years old. When Jacob died in Egypt, Jacob was 147 years old. So of those years, you get rid of the first 75 years till the covenant, and the years after Jacob died. You have 232 years, 232 years of covenant action from giving it to Abraham to Jacob's death in Egypt. If you add 232 years to 1800, you get 2032. If you take 1980, it's been 44 years since 1980. And we know we studied a little bit on the Jubilees. Jubilee would be 49 years. Um, Also, generations. We looked at generations being 69 observed years, 70 prophetic years. Um, King David was 70 when he died. He was the last one to have the covenant before Jesus. So, depending on whether you're looking at covenants or generations or whatever, there's really, um, how do I put this? Um, Really, the the period of when you go by the tabernacle pattern, which everything has gone exactly to the tabernacle pattern, including the lives of the patriarchs and the events that happened. And you look at, what should we be looking for? We should be looking for a series of events, not just one event or whatever. And we start to see, like for example, that volcano. I mean, things are predicted as far as the tsunamis, volcanoes, etc. But that particular volcano was on the shores of the U.S. The time everything transferred over to the U.S. As far as the beast and all this sort of stuff, it was on the shores of the U.S. and it things happened rapidly, you know, since that time in terms of the Book of Revelation. Some of things that are talked about all start coming together. Boom, 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 boom. So the signs are already coming, and by 2032, all of the signs will will be there. And I'm not, I don't, I can't show you right now, but I'm going to show you that by 2032, if Jesus doesn't come before that, all the signs will be there. So, any, if you took from that point on, you know, for the next, 20, depending on counting 69 years, 44 years, whatever, Jesus could come at any time. And and when we're doing this type of study in the Book of Tabernacle, that's why it's so important to do that study, to digest the whole book, to eat that scroll before we go out and start trying to evangelize the world or tell everybody else whatever. Each lesson is a little learning block, whatever. But there's so much more to come. And I'm skipping ahead to show you this because I'm not going to be around for a few weeks to show you that when we move forward, there's lots to look forward to. And the more we move forward, the more we can rely on the tabernacle pattern more than anything else, because you'll see, why 180 years, and you see what happened in the life of the patriarchs, and you see that they just parallel exactly, like I said, even like if you take, like I said, this 232-year period from 1800 to 2032, it's exactly like the period between, when uh, Abraham was 75 years old and when Jacob died in Egypt. You know, After a certain amount of signs come or covenants are fulfilled, it can be any time after that. But my let's check my name here. The point of it all is that when you're given something to observe, you can, I mean, you haven't heard probably anywhere else here except for some maybe quacky things about Mount St. Helens being a specific sign, but it is because something was foretold to happen in 1980 if you keep the pattern going from Jesus till today. 1980 was the year that something should happen to set off a series of events. And, and the time is near. And so when we talk about, like I said, the flood or whatever, 90% of people still say, "Oh, that's crazy, no flood," and whatever. But the evidence, the observable evidence, um, we've been shown in our generation, real evidence, and we've also been shown when we go back and look at this tabernacle, just looking at the picture of this Ark of the Covenant and who fulfilled that and when it was fulfilled, and now the fulfillment of the king event or the crown event. you know, Everything has happened according to that pattern. And it's all happened through a pattern that was to foreshadow the things from heaven that would be done through Jesus Christ. And the crowning event of that whole thing is his return. The crowning event, and there's the beauty and what he's done for us and how he's accomplished this and the truth behind it all, is something to be observed. And I know because I've had experience with people that haven't read the Bible much or don't know much about it or even have read it and are angry and against the Bible. When I start to show them some of the things that I've shared with you, it's a complete turning point. Now they're interested because everyone wants the truth, wants to know the truth. And sometimes I find when you tell people that are very comfortable and that, oh, I know Jesus is coming, they're kind of less interested, then they want to argue with you about dates or times or this or that. But this tabernacle and our observance of it is one of the most beautiful studies you can ever have because each picture tells you something. When this Day of Atonement, it doesn't tell you about some king that came along and had it easy and inherited everything, and because of that, we get to be his servants. It tells you somebody that took off their royal robe, you know, their heavenly robe, just like Moses, forsake his, you know, him being prince in Egypt. He took off that robe and he went to join his own brethren in slavery and tried to lead them out, on his own at first, but then with God, lead them to their freedom. And Jesus took off all his royalty, became, as a humble servant, paid the price, revealed the truth, um, and God raised, his love for us and his love for God. God raised him up, as the resurrection and our resurrection, and it's him that's returning. And so all of these testimonies that are testifying against the Bible, directly trying to testify against the Bible, they mean nothing. They'll never have evidence of their truth. Never. They'll never, life coming from non-life. I mean, the fundamental law of biology is life begets life. It's the life of biogenesis. That's what all biology works on, and that's what everyone sees every day. But yet, to make this evolution true, they got to have abiogenesis, which means that life can come from non-life, and it's this hypothesis and this and this and all these rabbit holes. And you have this beautiful, beautiful um, account given over 3,000 years ago to Moses, a shepherd, foretelling the end from the beginning. And everything works to this pattern that he was not supposed to deviate from. So one of the reasons why I'm going to take some time off to prepare this properly is just because I really, there's things going on in my personal life and other things where I just don't have time to mess around. It's time to just say it like it is, put it out there, and and let people have a chance to evaluate it and use it themselves to for their own studies and to whatever. So when I return, it's going to be a little bit like I said, all the stuff I've done up to now is fundamental, foundational. You can look back, but I'm going to be getting pretty specific because I'm talking about our life now and our beliefs and timelines and things like that. And so, I'm going to yeah, I'm just going to say it like it is, and so I hope, and this was a little bit shorter today, but I hope that you'll join me. I hope that you'll have an open mind. I hope that you'll check everything, double check everything. You always want to use the Bible as the only source of the truth when we're talking about biblical things. But I think you'll find that it's an incredible the tabernacle and everything that we were given to observe in it, whether it's the Sabbath or the holy days or uh, anything. It's a it's for a purpose. It's for a lesson. It's for something. Remember that everything given is something to be observed and a rehearsal for something to come. And so, this um, pattern of the time when 1980 hits is also part of the pattern for the feast days and things like that as well. So there's all kinds of things that converge around that time, but it's like that date is a benchmark, just like Isaac's death was a benchmark. Isaac was the promised child, but it was Joseph that went to the crown and Joseph that brought them into Egypt and things like that. Isaac's never, Isaac died the year before, but for a reason. That's when things would kick off, and things in 1800 at the year 6000 prophetically, or 1888 observational wise, kick in, and you start to see these things that aren't coincidental. We feel like, gee, we're living in a world where the countries seem to be getting together, and this seems to be happening, and that seems to be happening. It's not seems to be; it is happening. It's really gotten bolder since 1980. And this mountain, let's talk about St. Helens. It's erupted, small eruptions and stuff like that, still bubbling several times. 2007, and it's forecast, and this is not biblical. This is geologists say it, to erupt again in our lifetime. So they're thinking, there's 150 years of dormancy and 500 years of dormancy before that, but they're because of it right now, because of how it's the way they can observe it. That thing is something to watch out for. But it's set off something, and like I said, it happened in America. It happened where we could observe it. It taught a great lesson. It was and it marked a change in the times. So I called this presentation "Observing the Signs of Our Time" because as we go into things, we'll go into the book of Revelation, and we'll see about some of these things that were foretold and time back into the tabernacle pattern and things like that. But the whole book of Revelation is set in the tabernacle, set first tabernacle on earth and then tabernacle in heaven, and then returning to earth. So without understanding the tabernacle, we can't really understand the book of Revelation. And so anyway, I'm a little bit ahead of my time, but I'm going to end a little early. In fact, what I'll do, so I'm going to stop sharing from here, which will give me a few minutes to do a short question and answer. If we want to do that, Sandy, I can go back to my panelist view. So
Well,
yeah, I can take.
I noticed something when you were talking about 2007. I looked it up to make sure. And I don't know. To me, it was something important. My folks went to a thing down in Pasadena. A lot of you would remember. And it was the official launch of the CCT, Christian Churches. What was it? What's it called? Christian Churches Together.
Yeah.
And it was launched then, and they went to it, and they were sitting there watching all these people from various religions and everything, and all kinds go up and sign a document. And
Yeah.
that's where it started. It was a ecumenical worship service in Pasadena in February 2007. That
Well,
was a
there's
fascinating thing for that year.
there's
I
some pretty
remember
cool
your
things
dad
when you
talking
look at, like,
about that.
remember when I said 232 years was really the active time of that covenant between Abraham at 75 years old and Jacob dying in Egypt. So, but things happen, obviously before Jacob dies, he goes into Egypt and they have 17 years of living there and stuff. Well, 220 years is a very important time too. And 220 years marks when Britain left the European Union, and it's, you know, talk about the toes having not cleaving together and et cetera, et cetera. But, I'm trying to say basically that there's a series of events happening and a series of things converging. And, and that when you say, well, give me a sign, well, the signs are all there. So, but some people think, okay, well, here's this sign. So that means that this is the sign that Jesus is coming now or next year. But when you read Revelation, that sign was given, but not as the return of Christ. It was given as you'll know the time is near. And so there's a lot of signs that have been given and are given that are real and that are true that, means keep watching, look around, whatever. But the signs, the final signs that, are like, okay, put on your hat and this is it. I believe will be given by 2032, so and I don't know when Jesus is going to return. Could be that minute, could be 20 years later, but I just believe that when you look at the pattern and you look at, I know that as of, like I said before, 2027, the last capstone is now being laid as of, the next 3 years. And somewhere in that time frame, the last signs are given, et cetera, et cetera. But it's too serious to, like, because I'm not forecasting any date or whatever. I'm just saying that our generation should fully understand, based on everything we see, that we are the last generation before the return of Christ. And that doesn't mean someone could be born today and be 2 years old, and be 20 years old when Christ comes. But there are people alive today that will see the return of Christ. That's for sure.
You say 2032, but it's cut short. We don't know where it's going to cut short. It could be before that. Just because things haven't completed, we don't know his time.
I'm saying that signs will be given by that time, but you don't,
We
but
know
that
we're
doesn't,
there.
yeah, which will give us understanding, of the time, and but and that might be, right away. Who knows? All that I know is that if you were going to do a little, like a pattern, and you're going to go, okay, here, 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 you go all the way from Adam, and just like we did, I showed you that slide. We have Enoch, we have, you know, uh, Noah, Moses, so, and as if we break that slide down more, which we will, you get these little 360-year periods from the patriarchs, or 70-year periods and periods of David, monarch. But it's like this: boom, 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 boom. It all has to do with 1.5, 2.5, 2.25, 3.75, 5.625, and then start over again. Boom, 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 boom. So you would have a little thing, and you would be expecting something fairly major in 1800, the 1800s, a little 88-year period there from 1801 to 1888. Some things good and bad to happen. and we know some good things, good and bad things that did happen in 1800s. And then you'd have to expect not much after that till about 1980, and you'd expect that cycle to start over again, with some good and bad things starting to happen. So because you would kind of jump from either from 1800 right to 1980, or from 1888 to 1980 for a different time scale. And then you'd expect a series of events to happen, but this would be the last series of events to happen. So it's a series of events. It's not a single event. A series of events, like the baptism of Jesus, the birth of Jesus, the ministry of Jesus, the resurrection of Jesus. Good and bad things happen from that 33-year period, you know? So there's a period of time, and we're not going to know maybe the exact day or hour of the return of Christ, but we are going to know that we're in that generation, just like the disciples knew they were in the last generation, his first return. So there's a time, whether you count jubilees or you count, different things, there's a time period. And the last one can't start any later than 2027. That's and then there's a period that could be up to, another 40 years, whatever, but things, events happen, and they've been happening since 1980. And if you check, some historic dates, those are the dates. Like, I mean, they tried to have a official acknowledgement between the Vatican and the United States since the 50s. I mean, Truman tried to put it in, et cetera, et cetera. It was only when Reagan got it in, in the 80s, 84. The EU, I mean, that was going on since the 50s, but each treaty got a little bit stronger, gave more power, gave more authority, gave more, economic system, same money, same, so that it got stronger and stronger. And, in the 80s, it unified the previous ones, so um, anyway, so a series of events happens, and then, then and those things, both the good and the bad become more overt, more open. What's hidden becomes more overt, more open. And so, that's why we see now today much more overtly what began actually in the 80s, of what's happening around the world, you know. So, but that sign was given in the 80s and it started to happen. But anyway, so my time is, I'm going to do one question if someone has one quick question, and then turn it over to Hein. Any more quick one?
Well, Brent, have you studied the relationship, the differences between the Mount St. Helens earthquake and the